Hey, it's Joe from Home Studio Corner. We're going to talk about mixing vocals today, specifically compression on vocals. If you're new to mixing or you feel like your mix sessions look a lot like randomly clicking buttons and twisting knobs with no clear purpose, I can completely relate. I've created a guide that will give you a 5-step process to help you navigate through your next mix session. You can have it for free. Just go to 5stepmix.com to check that out. There are very few things that I do by default when it comes to mixing a song. I really like to take the tracks as they come, give the tracks what they need. But almost, I'd say 99 times out of 100, I'm going to add compression to the lead vocal, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Basically, by the end of this video, I want to give you a starting point for your compression settings, and then you can work from there. These seem to work for me every time, and I'm going to show you exactly how that works. So first, let's dive into Studio One. I've got a vocal here with the only thing it has on it right now is a little bit of EQ. And here's what that sounds like.
And I never was much of a fighter. And I never was much of a fighter.
The human voice, beautiful though it is pretty dynamic. And that can sometimes be a great thing. But a lot of times in a dense kind of modern mix, the vocal can tend to get lost. Or it does this weird thing where in certain notes it jumps out and it's too loud and then it gets lost on other notes, sometimes within the same word. And you may think the only solution would be to like automate the volume of each phrase to get it to be the right volume. But there's a much easier way that I think sounds better, and that is obviously compression. So here's the first thing I will always do when compressing a vocal. Use a short, or in other words, a fast attack time. So in this session here, I've got a compressor track here I'm going to turn on, and my go-to starting attack and release times for vocals, something like this: 10 millisecond attack, maybe 10 millisecond release. The release to me isn't super important. Anywhere between 10 and 50 to 100 I think is fine. The attack is where the good stuff happens. So why is that? If we do a longer attack, so something like 150 millisecond attack, that can be really cool on things like drums to allow the drum to still stay punchy. So it punches and then the compressor clamps down on the rest of the sound. That's wonderful for drums, bass, sometimes guitars, lots of different things. For vocals, not so much. I don't want a punchy vocal. I want kind of a restrained, restricted, almost flat, dynamically speaking, vocal. I don't mean I want it to be boring, and I don't want to crush it within an inch of its life necessarily, but I do want to contain it. So real quickly, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? Let's listen to this again. Right now, this raw vocal with just some EQ on it is a little bit too punchy. It's a little bit too all over the place. Listen to how certain phrases and vowel sounds jump out, others drop down and disappear.
And I never was much of a fighter. And I never was much of a fighter.
The solution here, among several things, is to give it pretty aggressive compression settings, and that starts with a fast attack time. Now, I'll talk about why I like to go aggressive on the compressor later in the video, but for now, this is the setting that I like to use. I like to go with a 10 millisecond attack and release. The ratio, I don't really care. 4:1 is fine, but once we have our attack set to 10 milliseconds, the next thing I want to do is bring the threshold down until I'm getting roughly no less than 10 dB of gain reduction. So what is gain reduction? If I hit play and this compressor is on, right now it's not compressing anything. As I lower the threshold, you can see this little thing right here starts to show me what's called the gain reduction, which is how much the compressor is turning things down. I have found over, many years of experimenting, I like it generally when the compressor is doing at least about 10 dB of gain reduction. So something about right here. Now, because that's a lot quieter, we're going to use the makeup gain to get the volume back up to where it was, and it's going to be a much more consistent, tighter vocal sound. So let's do that real quickly. I'll kind of build that up so you can hear what's happening.
And I never was much of a fighter. And I never was much of a fighter. And I never was much of a fighter.
It's almost like the compression is acting like a fairness system. Like, it's giving every syllable an equal opportunity to be heard, so that the way I sang it, much of a fighter, I didn't sing them consistently volume-wise. I like the way it sounds when I sang it, but it doesn't translate super well into a mix. But here, the compressor is kind of evening everything out so I can hear each phrase. So even when I go, really loud, and then of a fighter, those last little notes there still come through because of the way the compression's working.
Much of a fighter.
Or like right here.
Much of a fighter.
The quieter notes get louder, the louder notes get quieter. That is the tale as old as time when it comes to compression. But I think a big part of that is making sure you have a fast attack on the compressor itself. Think of your classic compressor plugins that people like to use, like something that's modeled after an 1176. The 1176, no matter where you set the attack time, it's really fast. I want to say the slowest attack time is like around 1 to 10 milliseconds. So 10 milliseconds is even considered maybe slow to some folks, but having it to my ear fairly quick means it's going to grab that vocal, it's going to clamp down on it, it's going to be aggressive, which is what the vocal needs. So why do vocals need aggressive compression? Well, my answer to that will be one of the common mistakes I hear when I do critiques for people is they tend to undercompress the vocal. So they leave the vocal, maybe they're scared to overdo it with compression, which you certainly can do, but they go the other direction and they don't compress it enough. So the vocal it pops out in places and it's rowdy, it's unruly, and it causes more problems. So by compressing it pretty aggressively, we actually sometimes solve other problems, like something that may sound like it was an EQ problem. By compressing the vocal, we kind of tighten down those frequencies so those EQ problems aren't quite as problematic as they were before. We end up, to my ear, solving more problems than we cause by going pretty aggressive with the compression. Again, around that 10 dB of gain reduction mark seems to be the sweet spot. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. It all depends on a number of factors, but that's at least the place where I like to start. Now, compression does cause problems sometimes. So if you go real aggressive with the compression, depending on the voice and the microphone and several other factors, you might end up with a vocal that sits nicely, but now it's got a lot of sibilance. So those S's and T's have been exaggerated too much. That's why it's usually a good idea to pair your compressor with some sort of de-esser that goes in and takes those excessive S's and T's out. That feels like backwards, like why am I causing problems only to fix them later? But while over compression, excessive aggressive compression does cause that one problem, it also makes the vocal work a lot better in the mix. It's the sound of the modern vocal to my ear. So the trade-off to me is worth it. As with everything I teach, don't just take my word for it. Go try it on a mix. See how it works. Come back and let us know how that worked for you. And if you don't have that free 5-step mix guide, be sure to grab a copy now. Go to 5stepmix.com. All right, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.